We turn our attention next to we should make a list, shouldn't we, of the journalists who pretty much have a bat phone now. If they tell us that something is interesting enough to get on the programme, then we generally just wave them in, tell them to pull up a chair, make them a cup of tea, ask them to sit down. Very near the top, if not at the very top of that list, of course, is Peter Geoghegan, the author of Democracy for Sale, editor of the Democracy for Sale Substack, who joins us now with an exclusive report on one of those areas in which we share an interest, and it is a combination of both story and bafflement stroke frustration that more people in our line of work don't work a little bit harder to chase down stories like this, I think, Peter.
Thank you very much, James. I would love to be I'd love to be sitting right in front of you with a cup of tea. Actually, unfortunately, I'm down the line with my cuppa. But yeah, I think this is one of these. I think of all the stories I wrote about this yesterday, saying of all the kind of stories I've worked on in this area, which is PC people being sued by rich people, journalists like me and others been sued to shut us up. This is probably the craziest one. This is a story about a guy called Evgeny Prigozhin, who was the head of the Wagner Group. So, just if you remember, the Wagner Group are Putin's mercenary army that went out to Ukraine. Before they went to Ukraine, they murdered lots of people in places like Libya and Syria and the Central African Republic. They did a lot of murdering.
They were murderers for hire.
Murderers for Ireland, and they still are. Yevgeny Prigozhin was the head of the Wagner Group. We had actually we sanctioned him. Britain had sanctioned him in 2020 because of his involvement with the Wagner Group. And around the same time, Elliot Higgins, who's a great journalist at the organisation Bellingcat.
He's on the list as well, Pete. He's on that list as well.
I'm glad to hear that, James. I think he should be. Elliot is excellent. And Elliot and Bellingcat did a great series of reports that showed how Mr. Prigozhin and his business were absolutely hand in glove with what's called the GRU. That's Russia's state intelligence. So this is a man who heads up this is a sanctioned man, heads up this mercenary army. He's in business with military intelligence. What happens next is Elliot Higgins gets a libel claim from Mr. Prigozhin. And Mr. Prigozhin has to get special dispensation from the British government to take the libel claim because he's under sanctions. He hasn't got a bank account. So the government, which is the Treasury, then actually run by one or Sunak, gives Prigozhin special dispensation to hire a British law firm who go out to meet him in St. Petersburg to prepare his case against Elliot Higgins. And they then file a defamation claim against Elliot Higgins, saying that, and I'm not joking, that his been caused great distress. He's been gravely distressed by this suggestion it's got anything to do with this Wagner group, this awful group. It's a terrible thing, and it's appalling. And the poor man he's distraught by this. And anyway, so this claim goes in. Elliot Higgins has to spend £70,000 of his own money defending the claim. Eventually, it's struck out because Vladimir Putin's tanks invade Ukraine. Mr. Prigozhin's got more things to do. He's got better things to do with his time because he actually ends up out in Bakhmut, out in eastern Ukraine with his men. He's posts videos himself on the internet as
leading
the Wagner Group. Gives interviews talking about how he's a leader of the Wagner Group. So this is happening, and this is the same group that a few months earlier he said he was he was so gravely upset by being suggested anything to do with it. So this goes through, the claim collapses, and Elliot does what anyone I think in this situation would do, which is complains. He puts in a complaint to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the body that oversees solicitors. And the Solicitors Regulation Authority has said that they want to clamp down on these, what we call SLAP cases, strategic litigation against public participation. Basically, rich people using the law, like in this instance, where it's clearly untrue, to try and silence someone saying something they don't like. The kind of thing, frankly, would happen in somewhere like Russia. So, Solicitors Regulation Authority says we'll look into this. 2 full years it takes them to investigate this. They produce a report that's just 5 pages long, and the report says that no rules have been broken, no action needs to be taken against the law firm involved, and this wasn't a slap case. The law firm involved, there was only speculation that Prigozhin was involved with the Wagner Group at the time that the case was taken, even though he was under sanction. And that is the line drawn under it. Elliot Higgins will never see his £70,000 again, and frankly, it will only embolden people who want to silence journalists like me and others, and to kind of correct the record whichever way they want to.
So the sanctions were imposed for him providing support for the group in Libya, essentially leading it, and yet you could sue someone for saying that you were part of it. So,
Yeah, that's
I mean, I
exactly
just
what
want
happened.
people, and you've explained it perfectly.
This is
I can't
exactly
quite.
this is exactly what happened, James. Exactly what happened.
So,
He
what's the
was
point
under
of
British sanctions
sanctions?
for the very thing Elliot Higgins had accused him of, effectively.
So, the question you're asking in terms is what is the point of sanctions if you can sue someone for accusing you of having done the thing that you've been sanctioned for?
Exactly. It's an incredible situation. And if that is not a case of, if that is not a slap case, if that is not a case of someone trying to abuse the law, I don't know what is.
Come back, Franz Kafka. All is forgiven. Where does the I mean, blame is, I don't hope, maybe too simplistic a word, but who is at fault here? Are there individuals at fault? Were there any political decisions that were taken during this process? Are we suggesting that perhaps the solicitors regulator is not entirely fit for purpose? I mean, to where does the blame road lead?
I think
Responsibility, the road of responsibility, not blame.
I think the role responsibility now, on the back of when this initial story emerged a couple of years ago about Prigozhin suing Elliot Higgins, the government did tighten up things around suing about defamation cases with sanctions. So that has been dealt with. But I think the more fundamental thing around responsibility now is how we stop more cases like this in the future. How we stop rich people using libel courts. It can cost up to £3 million to take to defend a libel case. They're incredibly expensive. And how do we stop this happening? The government, when they were in opposition, Labour had said they would bring in legislation to tackle these slaps cases. Yesterday, the Labour minister was asked about this, actually by a Labour MP in Parliament, asked about my story and said, everything is fine. We're working within the parameters that we have effective. We don't need to do more. And the problem with that is, and the Solicitors Regulatory Authority is supposed to be the body that's going to really help them do it. What this shows is that this isn't going to work. If this case isn't a slap case, because what fundamentally it rests on being able to say if a case is a slap case. If a case is a slap case, then we can push it to an early dismissal and we get rid of it. If Mr. Prigozhin, who's now dead, now deceased, we can't look because he died in a fireball in Russia after crossing Putin. If Prigozhin suing Elliot Higgins for saying he's the head of the Wagner Group is not an example of a slap case, what is?
Well, exactly. And yet, no one's answered that question.
No, none. It really has been answered as come none. And this is an issue that isn't just to do with journalists. These cases are taken, we've seen actually a huge
Yeah,
increase
it's
in these
incredible.
legal cases. They're taken by people who've been victims of sexual abuse have had to take these cases because people have had these cases taken against them. People who've written reviews on TripAdvisor of these cases taken against them. We only know a very few of them that ever end up in court. They don't end up in court routinely because they're so expensive. And a lot of people would say everyone's got a right to justice. And I think that is true. Everyone gets a right to defend their reputation. But the problem is the way the system is set up is it's only those with money who can do that. And it's only those with money who can defend their reputation. It's only those with money who can take these sort of cases.
I want to talk briefly in a moment about the fact that he was able to use frozen funds to pay his legal fees, to pay his London law firm. But before that, is there a definition of a slap that observers, yourself, Elliot Higgins, and others would be happy with? Does it exist, or is it, as with so many matters legal, a case of interpretation?
There's been a lot of really good work. There's a thing called the UK Anti-SLAPP Coalition, and they put together a model law on this, and they've done quite a lot to try and formalize it. And there's quite a few parameters you can take. I won't go into all of them, but there's basically a checklist, which the government broadly agrees with of things, because the government brought some legislation around slaps about a year ago. So the government broadly actually accepts that there are things that you can see about a claim to say, okay, this claim we think this has got all the merits of a slap. It should go to an early dismissal. A judge can take a ruling on it. And effectively, what has to happen is it shouldn't cost someone like Elliot Higgins £70,000 to defend it. And the thing why this matters is the reason people like Prigozhin would take this case is it takes years to go to the High Court. It's both expensive and really time consuming. So in that time, this journalist who's causing you trouble, he's like someone like Elliot Higgins pulling up all sorts of information you don't want to know about. You want to wrap him up in paperwork, in expensive legal
Fear.
bills, in doing something else. So he doesn't do that, and
Yeah.
it's really effective. It has this huge chilling effect, and other people then won't report about him because there's a slap case, because there's a legal case ongoing against him. It's a really effective strategy.
Is there anyone on the other side of the argument? Is there anyone resisting calls for changes to or getting rid of slaps altogether.
Well, there has been, interestingly, when this issue really started to emerge in terms of as a government policy, actually after the invasion of Ukraine. Just after Ukraine, Boris Johnson said we're going to end lawfare, which is the same idea, and he's very bullish on it and said we're going to do something. Around the same time, something was created called the Society of Media Lawyers, which is a lot of people who work on the other side, who work with the claimants. A lot of these are big law firms. There's a lot of money in this,
There's a
you know,
lot of
like
money in
a
this.
lot of money. Like we're talking 3 million to get to, as I say, to get to a high court. A lot of money, and we've seen quite a few venerable and venerable lawyers, barristers who represent these cases, all clubbed together and effectively say there's not much to see here, Gov. They will say that people like me and the Anti-SLAPP Coalition are making a mountain out of a molehill. These cases are very few and far between. There's nothing, we don't need to do anything. And they've been quite effective, I think. They've been quite effective behind the scenes in lobbying and making the case for this and for their own interest, frankly. And it's hard to not see the emergence of that at the same time as one of the reasons, or at least the thing that's giving pause for thought to actually do something to stop this.
I think one of their number is in the House of Lords. One of that.
There is Lord Edward Garnier, who, as Tortoise revealed a few months ago, has spoken many times on slaps, but doesn't really mention the fact he's in the Society of Media Lawyers when he does so.
Final question. I think you touched on it when we heard Rishi Sunak's name, but the government gave Prigozhin permission to use funds that should have been frozen to pay for this legal process.
Yes, that was part of it. They gave him permission to do it. They also
But
incredibly
they weren't very frozen then, were they, Peter?
it's certainly melting, one might suggest. And they were able to pay for business flights out to St. Petersburg to discuss it. And I'll leave you with this. One of the most interesting aspects of this, James, as well, is it was really intentional to sue Elliot in London because the costs are bigger in London. Elliot actually, Bellingcat's based in the Netherlands. And we know from emails that were leaked that the lawyers actually were looking at his social media and waiting to see what he would tweet so they could try and take him to an English court, because that was the intention. It wasn't about what it was being said. It was about where it was being said and having maximum leverage.
It's demanding dereliction of duty with menaces.
That's one way of putting it.
Peter Geoghegan, many thanks indeed. Peter, of course, the editor of the Democracy for Sale Substack, where you can read more about all of the stories and more that he shares with us on this programme. And I once again recommend his book, Democracy for Sale.